In today's parable, Jesus continues to talk about his second coming and the end times in the parable of the 10 virgins. You're watching At the Pastor's Desk. So today's parable, the 10 virgins, is one of those parables that deals with the end times, deals with Jesus coming back and how the people are supposed to prepare for that happening. The context right before this parable is Jesus telling everyone that you don't know the day or the hour that the Son of Man is going to return. On this last day, when Jesus returns, no one's going to know when that's going to happen. And that was at the end of chapter 24. So this parable, right at the beginning of chapter 25, gives further evidence of the fact that no one knows when Jesus is going to return. If you want to follow along, this parable is found exclusively in Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 13. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. So Jesus sets the scene here. We've got these 10 virgins that are waiting for the bridegroom to return. And there are 5 wise virgins and 5 foolish virgins. So we have these wise ones, we have these foolish ones. Let's see how that plays out. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. So we see that the 5 foolish virgins didn't bring any extra oil. They just brought their lamps and enough to fill their lamps once, whereas the wise ones, the wise virgins, they brought extra oil with them, just in case it would take a little longer than expected. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all the virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. So they go out to meet the bridegroom, they prepare their lamps, and they're getting kind of tired. It's taking a little longer. The bridegroom is delayed in coming. He's not coming as soon as they had thought, and so they begin to get drowsy and they fall asleep. But then in the middle of the night, there's this cry that the bridegroom is finally here. And so all the virgins wake up and they trim their lamps in order to go and meet the bridegroom. But this is where the foolishness comes into play. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves." So the foolish ones, because they didn't bring any extra, they say to the wise ones who did, "Hey, why don't you share some of the oil that you have?" But the wise ones say, "There's not going to be enough for all of us. So go quickly, buy some for yourselves, and maybe you'll make it back in time." But are they able to get that oil in time? Let's see what happens. And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterwards the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." So the foolish virgins go to buy extra oil, but they don't make it in time. The bridegroom comes. He takes the 5 virgins who were ready with him into the great wedding banquet, and the door is shut. And these foolish virgins come and they shout out, "Lord, Lord, let us in." But the Lord comes out and he says to them something that's pretty surprising. He says, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you." And they are shut out. So let's break up this parable a little bit and figure out exactly what Jesus is talking about here. So going back to these 10 virgins, 5 of them are wise, 5 are foolish. And we see in the parable that the reason why 5 are wise and 5 are foolish is because the wise ones bring extra oil, and the foolish virgins don't have enough oil to make it to the end. And so what exactly is Jesus saying here? Well, there's a lot of debate over what this parable actually means. What does the oil stand for? What do the lamps stand for? All of these different things. What exactly is its interpretation? Well, I don't think that it's really that important to look at the lamps themselves, but this is really focused on the oil. That it's the lack of oil that makes these 5 foolish virgins actually foolish. And so I would go ahead and say that the oil itself is a representation of faith. That those who are wise have the oil, they have faith, and they have the faith that is sustained long enough in order to make it till the bridegroom returns. Whereas the other ones, they have a little bit, but it is not sustained, and they are not able to make it until the end. And so they go out and they wait, and it takes longer than expected. The bridegroom is delayed in his coming, which very much fits with how we kind of view the return of Christ. The disciples thought Jesus was going to return in his day, but he didn't. It took longer than they thought. And this has continued every generation. Every generation thinks that they are in the last days. And in fact, we are in the last days. But everyone thinks that Jesus is coming back in their lifetime because things are always bad. We live in a sinful world. And so these signs, these evil things that will happen before Jesus returns, they always happen. They happen to everyone. And so we always expect him to come sooner than he actually does. And so while they're waiting, they fall asleep. But then they wake up, the bridegroom's coming, Christ is returning, there's this cry, and all of a sudden, the foolish virgins realize that they made a fatal mistake. They didn't bring extra oil. They don't have enough oil. They didn't sustain that oil long enough to make it until the bridegroom came. And so they desperately ask the wise ones to share that oil. The problem is faith is not really something that you can share. And so these wise ones say, we can't give it to you. There won't be enough for both of us. So go to those who can give you oil, and maybe you'll get done in time. So the question with this interpretation of the oil being faith is, where does one go in order to get faith? You can't just go and buy faith. Well, two things on this. First, remember it's a parable, and that there is going to be some narrative description here. And so going and buying oil is symbolic of where you go to get faith. And I would argue that those places where you go to get faith is church. It is in church where you are given faith. It is through the word of God read and preached to you, and through the sacraments given and administered to you. It is through those means of grace that you are given faith. And so you can look at these two groups of virgins. You can look at the wise virgins who had plenty of oil for their lamps. They had been going to church. They had been going to the place where they could get oil readily. And so they were prepared for the end times. They were prepared for however long it would take the bridegroom, Jesus, to return. Whereas the foolish ones, they were not going to church. They were not continuing to get that oil so that their lamps would be fueled. In fact, it seemed like they were just doing kind of the bare minimum, maybe not really ever going to church, maybe being some of those people that say, oh, well, my relationship with Jesus is just me and him, and I don't need to go to church. After all, church is just the people. It's not a building. Church is where the people of God gather together around word and sacrament. It is through the word, through the sacraments, that faith is given to us and strengthened and sustained. And so if you're not going to church to readily get more oil to strengthen that faith, then you're going to run out, and it may come at your detriment on the last day. And in fact, these foolish virgins, they run to the church to try and get this oil, and they run back. And by the time they've come back, they call out, Lord, Lord, let us in. They are confessing their faith in this Lord, but it's too late. Jesus comes, opens the door, and looks at them and says, I do not know you. And he shuts them out. And they are left out in the darkness, out in that weeping and gnashing of teeth that we've heard in other parables. And it may seem harsh, but this is the reality, that those who wait until the very end, wait until Jesus himself returns, it's going to be too late for them. And this is the message that Jesus is trying to convey here. He says in the very last verse, watch therefore, for you do not know the day nor the hour. If those foolish virgins would have known the exact time that the bridegroom was going to return, they would have easily been able to go real quick and grab the oil that they need to in order to be ready for that time. But no one knows. Those virgins don't know. The wise and the foolish virgins didn't know. And so Jesus is advocating here to be prepared for his coming. And how are you supposed to be prepared for this second coming of Christ? Go to church. Now, unfortunately, many churches don't view church like this at all. They view it as a time for you to come and be with your fellow believers and to sing praises to God, and it's all you giving things to God. They don't view worship properly like we do in the Lutheran Church, where we come and receive from God. It's where God strengthens and nourishes us. And so I would argue that if you don't go to church, then that's how you begin to not be a Christian. If you're not going to church, your faith is not being fed, it's not being nourished, and therefore your faith is going to starve and it's going to die. And so it is of vital importance for all believers that they go to church. This is why Scripture says that we should not forsake meeting together, because it's in that meeting, that gathering around word and sacrament, that we have our faith strengthened and we are able to continue in the grace and mercy that God has given us. It's those people who have rejected church, who say that I don't need to go to church, that begin to fall away, begin to actually hate the church. And when you hate the church, you end up hating Christ himself and falling away. And so don't believe this lie that church is not in a building, that church is individualized, that it's just you and Jesus. No, church is about the people of God gathering together in a place around word and sacrament. And it's those word and sacraments that strengthen your faith and allow you to continue to be a Christian. Well, thank you for watching this video. Go ahead and give this video a like and share with any of your friends that you think would enjoy this video. Next time, we'll continue going through chapter 25. There are 2 more parables in chapter 25 that we will continue to address right in a row. So get ready for that video on Thursday. Be sure to subscribe to our channel if you haven't, and keep an eye out for that next video. And hope you have a good one. Stay safe. God bless.